And just a second, check out with Aryeh, Loyal Gallin, also known as Aryeh Gallin. He's a good friend of ours.
Yes,
He's helped us from the beginning.
Yair. You rang?
He has helped promote teachings, so he's provided a forum for us to talk to others. He was the first one to really help us. Others helped us in other ways, but as far as getting our message out to the public, Aryeh Gallin was the one out there who recognised the importance of what we're talking, and he's always been a friend of ours in that direction. Loyal Lao.
Yes. Yeah, I'm right here.
How much time do we have?
About another 25 minutes.
Okay, so I have another little talk to give on the religion matter. It's worth listening to, I hope. Yeah, and I think it's important. And it concerns Manasseh Ben Israel. Manasseh Ben Israel, who lived in the 1600s. Someone who knows Jewish history is famous, is well known, because he was instrumental in having the Jews readmitted to the British Isles, to England. And the Jews had been in England since before the Romans, in England and in Ireland, since before the Romans and after the Romans, and then through the Middle Ages. Here and there, reports of Jews having been present. More Jews came after the Normans conquered England. The Normans came from Normandy in France, but they were Scandinavians, mixed from both Norway and Denmark. And they were very important, and they conquered England. And William the Conqueror, 1066, when he conquered England, more Jews came over with him to England. And they were in England, and they were quite important. William Rufus arranged a disputation. William Rufus was the son of William the Conqueror. He arranged a disputation between the Jews, the wise people among the Jews and amongst Christian scholars. And he arranged a disputation, a debate between them, and he said if the Jews win, he will become Jewish. So you don't know how serious he was, because he was that way. But the Jews didn't want to be placed in the quandary of having to deal with such a proposition. So they arranged that the disputation would end in a draw, but nevertheless it took place. And the Jews were there and had ups and downs, so the Jews were not allowed, according to church law and according to the situation, the Jews were not allowed to engage in many of the usual occupations, so they had to maintain themselves through usury, through lending money and so on. And the local people didn't like that, and also the nobility used the Jews as middlemen. They extorted money from the Jews, so the Jews had to take extra interest from the common people. The common people didn't like them, and there were problems. So that in 1290 the Jews were expelled from England. From 1290 to the time of Manasseh Ben Israel. Manasseh Ben Israel lived in 1604, 1657. It was until his time the Jews were not allowed into England. At least not officially. There were Jews there. There were Jews there apparently from the time of Henry VII, definitely in the time of Henry VIII, who seems to have liked Jews, also Elizabeth I also. Tolerated Jews in the kingdom, was helped by Jews, and Shakespeare himself may have been Jewish, which is worth noting. And other points, but Jews officially were not allowed to enter the country until Manasseh Ben Israel came along, at least somewhere around that time. Manasseh Ben Israel was a descendant from Marranos, that is, he lived in Portugal. As in Portugal and Spain, you had very large communities of Jews. very large, millions of Jews, perhaps possibly millions of Jews. A large number. And they were expelled from Spain, expelled from Portugal, and many of them left. Others stayed, and those who stayed had to become Christians. So amongst those who had to become Christians were Jews who practiced Judaism in secret. They were known as Marranos or Anusim and Conversos. Manasseh Ben Israel belonged to a family of these people who had been descended from Jews, and they kept only intermarried with each other as much as possible, and they kept their Judaism secret. And he was in Portugal, and he left Portugal. He went to some island that belonged to Portugal. Then he moved to the Netherlands and Holland, where he openly became Jewish. And he was a scholar. He read a lot. He read a lot of different sources on philosophy, on science, metaphysics, on all kinds of subjects, also on the Bible. And he wrote a book called The Conciliator, which presents problems in the Bible or problems in the Talmud and so on, and he gives explanations, solutions to them. This is an important book. In addition to that, he corresponded with all the major savants, all the major intellectuals. Throughout the world he corresponded with them, he wrote them letters and discussed things with them. And this was common, this was a common practice in those times. They didn't have the internet like we have. They didn't have what we have now, but they had other things. They write letters to each other. A great learned person would say something, and other people would ask him questions, discuss it with him. And he would reply to them. And so a kind of community of intellectuals grew up in Western Europe, and he was part of it. And he also corresponded with people in England. People in England wanted to readmit the Jews to England. And so he went to England. He was invited to come to England. And he met John Sadler, who was the secretary of Oliver Cromwell, who at that time ruled in England. You had kings in England, and then you had the Stuart dynasty, James I, the king of Scotland. James VI, the king of Scotland, had married the Tudor family of Henry VIII, and he inherited the throne of England and became the king of England, the king of both England and Scotland, and he united England and Scotland together. And his son was Charles I. Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, that God had given the right of kings to rule as he liked. And he had disputes with the parliament. They had a parliament in England, they always had a parliament, a representative body in the parliament, representing landowners, people who owned a certain amount of property and so on. The parliament disagreed with him, and they said that the constitution, unwritten constitution, there was a right that the king could not do as he liked. He had to listen to the voice of the people. And so they had a war over that. And Oliver Cromwell took charge of the war, of the side of the reformers, of the Roundheads, who were fighting against the royalists, against the king. And they won. And they took over the country. And John Sadler was his secretary. And John Sadler believed the Lost End tribes were in England. And so did other people in the retinue and in the surroundings of Cromwell. And Cromwell himself believed in this, as has recently been proven. And he received Manasseh Ben Israel, and they talked and this and that, and Cromwell also helped him. Manasseh Ben Israel had financial problems. Cromwell helped him a little bit here and there. And they talked about it, and they tested the ground out in the public feeling, and they came to the conclusion that it wouldn't be for the best to have the Jews formally to pass laws letting the Jews come to England. Because then, when you put something into law, you also have to put all kinds of conditions and all kinds of qualifying courses. You make this politics, you compromise on issues. And this matter they didn't want to compromise. So Cromwell said it's better to leave it as it is. That is, he said, according to legal advice that he received, that there was no real barrier. There was no impediment for Jews who wanted to come to England coming to England. The law did not say anything against it. It had only been assumed that the law that had expelled them was still pertinent, whereas it was not. Therefore the Jews could come in. And they'd be better off that they just come in as they are and not have any special law promulgated to accept them. And that is the way it was, and that is the way it went. From then on, Jews were accepted back into England. That was the work of Manasseh Ben Israel. So amongst other things, Manasseh Ben Israel also believed in the lost 10 tribes, and he wanted this to be made known, that the lost 10 tribes were in certain areas. He seems to have been ambiguous as to whether the lost 10 tribes were in the British Isles or not. Some of his points indicate that they were. But he also believed that the lost 10 tribes were amongst the Red Indians, the Amerindians. Like some of the Mormons used to believe, and some of the early settlers of America used to believe. They found amongst the Indians all kinds of customs similar to Jewish customs, or similar to what they considered to be Jewish customs from the Old Testament. And they were always looking for lost 10 tribes. There were some people there who decided the lost 10 tribes were amongst the Red Indians, and also there were Jews who met Amerindians in South America and here and there, and one of them reported that he had heard them speak a Hebrew, and he swore on the Bible that he had done, that this is what had happened. Nowadays we think he may have been hallucinating, he hadn't drank water. It happens. People who don't drink water get dehydrated, they often hallucinate. Should be careful about that. I know people personally that happened to them. And so, at all events, this person swore on the Bible that is what had happened, and Manasseh Ben Israel heard him, accepted it, believed that it was true. And he wrote a book about this. And in his book he gives why he believes that the Indians are from the lost 10 tribes. Now, we don't believe this, but there may have been some people from lost 10 tribes amongst them. We had friends, we had followers who partly descend from Indians, and they believed it. And there may be something to it, but we haven't gone into it. At all events, most of the indications, all the indications concerning the lost 10 tribes can be found, can be applied to peoples in Western Europe and in the British Isles. So what am I getting at? So Manasseh Ben Israel wrote this book, proving his point. Now this book in effect has 2 parts. One part of it, he says he had that such and such a person saw this, heard that, swore on the Bible that this and that had happened. And another part of this book quotes from biblical verses, showing that the lost 10 tribes will be in America, according to how Manasseh Ben Israel interpreted it. And this section of his book is correct. The Bible does indicate that in the end times, the lost 10 tribes will be in America. They will return from North America. The Bible has verses indicating this. And Manasseh Ben Israel brought these verses together and explained them and elaborated upon them. And for that reason, we should accept that portion of his writing, because it was valid. And he quotes from the sages and from other writers and from classical writers. And amongst other things, he talks about another land. In Deuteronomy 9:28, Deuteronomy 9:28, it says, "And the Lord drew them out of their land in anger, The Lord rooted them out of their land in anger, and in wrath, in anger, and in great indignation, and cast them into another land, as it is to this day. And cast them into another land, as it is this day. The sages understood this to be referring to the lost 10 tribes. The Talmud, Mishnah Sanhedrin 10 says, this biblical prophecy refers to the lost 10 tribes, who had been exiled and were destined to remain in Eretz Acheret, another land, until close to the end times. And the Hebrew translation of another land is Eretz Acheret. And this expression in Hebrew also means new world. The word Eretz, translated as land, can also mean world. Acheret, translated as another land, can also connote later or new. New world. And the Americas were known as the New World. You take this literally as saying the lost 10 tribes are to be in the New World. And it says that in the end times, they will be there. But in the meantime, they may have been somewhere else. That is where Manasseh Ben Israel made a mistake. He, as everyone, as we also tend to do, assumed that the lost 10 tribes are just around the corner. Tomorrow, the next day, the lost 10 tribes are going to happen. Maybe they're already here. So Manasseh Ben Israel also in his time, he assumed that was what was going on. And if the lost 10 tribes are going to be redeemed tomorrow, and to be redeemed from the New World, therefore they must be in the New World now. And in his time, in the 1600s, most of the Americas and the Caribbean islands were populated by Amerindians. Later others came in. For instance, Manasseh says where it refers to isles, to the sea islands, and is referring to the Caribbean islands, the West Indies. And in his time they were populated by Amerindians. But most of those, or a good portion of those, were exterminated, killed out, or died from diseases and so on. And then the African slaves and the white people came in and intermixed with them and created the people who are there now. And this expression islands was apparently in the Atlantic Ocean, and in this case was referring to England, the British Isles. But the other verses refer to America, referring to America, North America, as it will be in the end times. From there the lost 10 tribes will come, and they will be the people of America now. It says in Isaiah 69 onwards, says, the islands shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first. The ships of Tarshish mean ships from Tartessus, that is a place known as Tarshish, according to the Phoenicians, facing the Atlantic Ocean, to the west of Gibraltar, facing the Atlantic Ocean. And it was an important emporium, an important merchandise center, and had ships. These ships are mentioned in the Bible, mentioned in Isaiah, mentioned in Ezekiel, mentioned in Psalms. And it refers to ships plying, sailing over the Atlantic Ocean. And Tarshish was also another name for the Atlantic Ocean. So saying the islands in the Atlantic Ocean and the ships from the Atlantic Ocean shall bring the sons and descendants of Israel back, and they have their silver and their gold with them. For the name of the Lord your God and of the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. And Isaiah quotes Isaiah 11, Manasseh Ben Israel quotes Isaiah 11. They shall walk up to the Lord, they will roar like a lion. When he roars, and his sons shall come trembling from the west. They shall return from the west of the land of Israel, that is from the Atlantic Ocean and from the Western Europe. Shall come trembling like a bird from Egypt, and like a dove from the land of Assyria, and will let them dwell in their houses, says the Lord. They will come like flying birds. So too in Isaiah 60 it said, who are these that fly like a cloud, like doves to their roots? Surely the isle shall wait for me in the ships of Tarshish first, to bring your sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God and the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified me. So Manasseh is quoting Isaiah to say the Western tribes will return from the area of Tarshish in the Atlantic Ocean, from the west of the land to the land of Israel, and they come both in ships, and as doves or pigeons flying straight home. And in the time of Manasseh they didn't have aeroplanes, but in our time we do have them. So the lost ten tribes, when they return, those who return to the land of Israel come back both in ships and by flying machines. And the Bible mentioned this, described it. Isaiah 68, who are these who fly like a cloud and like doves to their roots, doves to their cots, doves to their place of their nests? They're islands, and these islands are referring to the islands of the Atlantic Ocean, the British Isles. That is where the Western tribes will return from. But from Tarshish, ships of Tarshish, from the Atlantic Ocean, from America, and from the British Isles, and from Western Europe. Verses in Isaiah that speak of the Western tribes coming back from the isles of the sea. And he says the words translated as islands of the sea can also mean the islands of the west, for they come from the west. And that they will have been scattered to the west and to other areas. Westward from the Holy Land. Islands of the sea, he says, means islands of the west, and that is correct. In Hebrew, Yam, as we find in Genesis 28:14, the sea also is synonymous. It can also mean west. When it says something comes from the sea area, it means it's coming from the west side, and that's where the lost ten tribes are, to the west of the land of Israel. From there they will return. He mentions that the Jews are described as dispersed, whereas the lost ten tribes are described as outcasts. Because the Jews will have been dispersed throughout the earth, or to many areas, whereas the lost ten tribes will have been outcast to specific areas. So he goes on these matters. He speaks at some length concerning them. We have articles about them. If you have more interest in the subject, look these articles up. At all events, these are points worth noting. They prove that lost ten tribes are amongst Western peoples. That is where the lost ten tribes are. That is who they are. And this is worth knowing. Thank you.